The world Emma of Normandy was born into was one of shifting alliances and ever-present danger. The daughter of Duke Richard I of Normandy, she grew up in a court that blended Norman ambition with Frankish sophistication. Her childhood, while privileged, was a constant lesson in power and diplomacy. From a young age, Emma understood that her future would not be her own to decide, but rather a tool for her family's influence. Her tutors drilled her in the languages of politics, Latin, Old English, and Norman French. She learned not only the art of conversation but the subtle skill of reading faces, deciphering what words left unsaid might mean. From her mother, Emma inherited a sharp mind and a sense of duty. The stories of her Viking ancestors, who had carved out Normandy from the Frankish lands, inspired her. Emma knew she was more than a mere noblewoman. She carried the legacy of conquerors. When the news came in the spring of 1002 that Æthelred, King of England, sought a Norman bride, Emma's life changed forever. England was a land of wealth and turmoil, and its king, desperate to secure his throne, sought an alliance with Normandy to deter Viking raids. The Duke of Normandy saw this as an opportunity to expand his influence across the Channel. Emma, at the age of 17, was the perfect choice. Her departure from Normandy was marked by ceremony and sorrow. The cold winds of the Channel mirrored the chill in her heart. She knew little of her future husband beyond what the envoys had described. Æthelred, though a king, bore the moniker the Unready, derived not from personal indecision but from his poor counsel. His rule was marred by Viking incursions, internal dissent, and mistrust among his nobles. Emma's mission was clear: to bring stability through her union and to bear heirs who could unite England. Her arrival in England was nothing short of a spectacle. The city of Winchester, her new home, greeted her with flowers and banners. Though the smiles of the people seemed strained, they knew too well the king's struggles. Emma stood tall, her golden hair gleaming like sunlight against the dark stones of the palace. To the English court, she was Ælfjefu, the name given to her to assimilate her into their world. But Emma did not forget who she was. She carried herself with the grace of a Norman duchess, a stark contrast to the beleaguered English court. Her first meeting with Æthelred was formal and perfunctory. The king, over a decade her senior, was a man worn by years of conflict. His eyes, sharp yet tired, studied her with an air of appraisal. Emma noted the weight he bore, the mistrust of his nobles, the ceaseless Viking threats, and the legacy of his predecessors. She felt a pang of sympathy but steeled herself. She was not there to pity him but to play her role. Their wedding was a grand affair, intended to display unity and strength. The Archbishop of Canterbury blessed the union, while nobles from across the land feasted in the Great Hall. Emma smiled through it all, her mind already working. She observed the faces around her, noting which nobles spoke with ease and which exchanged wary glances. She understood that England was as fragmented as Normandy, if not more so. As Queen of England, Emma wasted no time asserting herself. Though Æthelred kept her at arm's length in matters of state, she found ways to exert influence. She cultivated relationships with key figures in the court, offering Norman wit and charm where Æthelred's brusqueness had alienated others. She brought with her Norman advisors, who began to introduce subtle changes in governance, favoring efficiency and order. Slowly, Emma began to build her own network of allies. Her greatest challenge came within the first year of her marriage. On St. Brice's Day, November 13th, 1002, Æthelred ordered the massacre of Danes living in England, an act of desperation against the Viking threat. Emma was horrified. The violence not only failed to stem the Viking raids but provoked them further. Sweyn Forkbeard, the Danish king, launched a series of brutal attacks in retaliation. Emma's position became precarious. As a Norman, she was viewed with suspicion by the English, yet she also carried the burden of her husband's actions. In private, Emma confronted Æthelred about the massacre. Their argument was fierce. Æthelred defended his decision as necessary for the survival of the kingdom. But Emma saw the deeper truth. It was an act born of fear and frustration. That night, Emma made a vow to herself. If Æthelred could not secure England's future, she would. Her loyalty to him as a husband was secondary to her loyalty to the crown. Emma's first test of resilience came with the birth of her first child, Edward. She knew that her son was more than a child. He was a symbol of hope and unity. She lavished him with attention, ensuring he was raised with both Norman discipline and English heritage. To the court, Emma presented herself as the ideal queen, dutiful, pious, and motherly, but behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly to secure her children's future. As the Viking raids intensified, Emma's role expanded. Æthelred, overwhelmed and indecisive, began to rely more on her counsel. She used her Norman connections to gather intelligence on Viking movements, relaying critical information to the English defense. Though Æthelred rarely acknowledged her contributions, the court began to notice Emma's quiet competence. Years passed, and the strain of constant war took its toll. Æthelred grew more withdrawn, and Emma's position became increasingly isolated. Yet, she endured, driven by her vision of a stronger England. She saw herself not just as a queen but as a protector of the realm. Her marriage to Æthelred, though cold and fraught, was a means to an end. By the time Emma had borne her second son, Alfred, she was a fixture in the English court. Her influence was undeniable, though not without enemies. Some nobles resented her Norman origins and whispered that she was more loyal to Normandy than to England. Emma dismissed such accusations with grace, but she never underestimated the danger they posed. She knew that the court was a battlefield as treacherous as any Viking raid. As the 1010s dawned, the kingdom stood on the brink of collapse. Sweyn Forkbeard's forces ravaged the land, and Æthelred's rule grew increasingly unstable. Emma, ever pragmatic, began to prepare for the worst. She secured safe passage for her children to Normandy, ensuring that the Norman court would protect them if England fell. Though her heart ached at the thought of parting with them, she knew it was necessary. The day Sweyn Forkbeard's army marched into Winchester, Emma stood at the battlements of the palace, her face calm but her heart heavy. Æthelred had fled to Normandy, leaving his kingdom to crumble. Emma, however, refused to abandon her people. She met with Sweyn's envoys, negotiating the terms of surrender with the same dignity she had displayed on her wedding day. Though she was no longer queen in name, she remained a symbol of resilience to the English people. The second chapter of Emma's story begins with turmoil. England was no longer her husband's domain. After Sweyn Forkbeard seized the English throne in 1013, Æthelred had fled with their children to Normandy. Emma, now displaced, found herself torn between two worlds. She was a Norman duchess, an English queen, and now, perhaps, a political liability. But Emma was nothing if not resilient. The court of Normandy welcomed her and her children warmly. But beneath the surface, tension brewed. Æthelred's retreat was seen as cowardice by many in Normandy, and whispers questioned Emma's influence over her husband. Yet Emma maintained her composure. She directed her energy toward ensuring her children, especially Edward and Alfred, were nurtured in Norman culture, preserving their royal lineage and potential claim to England. Æthelred's exile did not last long. In early 1014, Sweyn Forkbeard died unexpectedly, throwing England into chaos. Danish forces rallied behind Sweyn's son, Cnut, but Æthelred, with the support of English nobles and Emma's Norman allies, sought to reclaim his throne. Emma's role in this campaign was pivotal. While Æthelred rallied troops, Emma acted as the bridge between Normandy and England, ensuring that supplies, ships, and soldiers flowed steadily from her homeland to aid her husband's cause. By the end of 1014, Æthelred was back in England, reinstated as king. Emma returned to Winchester, her heart heavy with caution. She knew this victory was tenuous. The English nobility, fractious and mistrustful, could not be relied upon for long. Meanwhile, Cnut was far from defeated. He regrouped his forces and prepared to strike back. Emma urged Æthelred to strengthen alliances and fortify defenses, but his characteristic indecision returned. It was a bitter reminder of why his nickname, the Unready, persisted. Emma's frustrations with Æthelred mounted, but she continued to play her role as queen with dignity. Her presence in court served as a stabilizing force. Even as her husband faltered, she attended councils, advised nobles, and carefully managed her household to project an image of unity and strength. She knew that perception was power, especially in a kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse. In 1016, tragedy struck. Æthelred died amidst renewed Viking invasions led by Cnut. Emma, now a widow, faced an uncertain future. Her eldest son, Æthelred, was still too young to claim the throne, and her position as queen mother offered little protection in the face of Cnut's advancing armies. Emma made the difficult decision to send Æthelred and Alfred back to Normandy for their safety, though the separation broke her heart. As Cnut solidified his control over England, Emma found herself at a crossroads. She could retreat to Normandy, abandoning her ties to the English crown, or she could adapt to the new regime. Emma chose the latter. She was determined to secure not only her own position but also the future of her children. When Cnut summoned her to negotiate, Emma approached the meeting with calculated determination. She knew that as the widow of Æthelred and mother of potential heirs to the throne, she was both a threat and an asset to the Danish king. Cnut, pragmatic and ambitious, recognized Emma's value. He proposed a marriage alliance, a union that would legitimize his rule and provide Emma with a renewed role as queen. The decision was not an easy one. Marrying the man who had overthrown her husband and driven her into exile seemed unthinkable. Yet Emma understood the realities of power. By aligning herself with Cnut, she could maintain her influence in England and ensure her children's safety. Reluctantly, but resolutely, she agreed. Their marriage in 1017 was a political masterpiece. It united English and Danish factions, stabilizing Cnut's reign and elevating Emma to an unprecedented position of authority. She was now queen of a new dynasty, tasked with navigating the complexities of a kingdom still reeling from years of conflict. Unlike her marriage to Æthelred, Emma's partnership with Cnut was marked by mutual respect. Though they were not equals in power, Cnut valued Emma's intelligence and counsel. She became a trusted advisor, helping to bridge the cultural divide between the English and Danes. Emma also played a significant role in consolidating Cnut's rule, using her Norman connections to strengthen ties with continental Europe. Emma's political acumen shone in her efforts to secure her children's future. While Cnut had children from a previous marriage, Emma ensured that her own sons, particularly Æthelred and Alfred, remained in the line of succession. She negotiated tirelessly, navigating the delicate balance between her loyalty to Cnut and her duty to her children. As queen, Emma championed reforms that reflected her vision of a unified kingdom. She worked to restore churches and monasteries that had been ravaged during the Viking invasions, recognizing their importance not only as centers of faith but also as symbols of stability. She also fostered education, ensuring that both English and Danish traditions were preserved and integrated. Emma's influence extended beyond politics. She cultivated an image of piety and maternal devotion, endearing herself to the English people. Her court became a beacon of culture and learning, drawing scholars, artists, and clerics from across Europe. Through her patronage, Emma reinforced the legitimacy of Cnut's rule and established herself as a queen who transcended national divides. Yet, despite her successes, Emma's life was not without challenges. The shadow of her sons in Normandy loomed over her, and she worried about their safety and future. She also faced opposition from factions within the court who resented her influence and questioned her loyalty. Emma navigated these challenges with the same resilience that had defined her life, using her wit and diplomacy to outmaneuver her enemies. By the early 1020s, Emma had become one of the most powerful women in Europe. Her marriage to Cnut, though born of necessity, had transformed into a partnership that reshaped the political landscape of England and beyond. Yet Emma knew that power was fleeting. She remained vigilant, aware that the stability she had worked so hard to achieve could crumble in an instant. As the second act of Emma's life came to a close, she stood as a testament to the power of adaptability and determination. From a Norman duchess to an English queen, from exile to influence, Emma had navigated a world of shifting alliances and relentless challenges with grace and fortitude. Her journey was far from over, but she had proven time and again that she was more than a pawn in the games of kings. She was a force in her own right. Cnut the Great's reign marked a new chapter for Emma, one where her influence expanded beyond what she had achieved as Æthelred's queen. She was now the consort of one of the most powerful rulers in Europe, whose empire stretched across England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden. Yet, for all its might, Cnut's rule was not without challenges, and Emma found herself at the center of political intrigue, familial rivalry, and the delicate task of securing her legacy. Emma had learned early in life that power was fragile, and under Cnut, she was determined to wield her authority wisely. Their union, though political in origin, evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect. Cnut valued Emma not only as a queen but as a stateswoman whose counsel was critical to the success of his reign. Together, they worked to unify the English and Danish factions that had long been at odds, striving to create a cohesive kingdom. One of Emma's first acts as queen consort was to assert her position as a protector of the English crown. She insisted that the legitimacy of her children with Cnut, particularly Harthacnut, be recognized, ensuring their place in the line of succession. This put her at odds with Cnut's sons from his previous marriage, particularly Harold Harefoot, who had his own ambitions for the throne. Emma's household became a court within a court, a bastion of her influence where her allies gathered to strategize and support her cause. Emma's political acumen shone in her ability to navigate these rivalries. She maintained a delicate balance, fostering alliances with key English and Danish nobles while carefully managing her relationship with Cnut's other children. She also kept a watchful eye on her sons in Normandy, Edward and Alfred, whom she continued to advocate for despite their growing distance from the English court. Emma's letters to Normandy were filled with advice and encouragement, urging her sons to prepare for a future where their claims might be tested. Cnut, for his part, was a ruler of remarkable ambition and pragmatism. He relied on Emma not only as a queen but as a bridge to the English people, who were still adjusting to Danish rule. Together, they embarked on projects to restore the kingdom after years of Viking raids and internal strife. Churches were rebuilt, laws were codified, and trade routes were strengthened. Emma's patronage of religious institutions earned her the loyalty of the clergy, while her efforts to restore monastic lands gained her the admiration of the people. Despite these successes, the court was not without its tensions. Harold Harefoot's supporters resented Emma's growing influence, accusing her of favoring her Norman heritage over her English duties. These accusations reached a boiling point when rumors spread that Emma sought to bring Edward and Alfred back to England to challenge Cnut's authority. While these claims were unfounded, they underscored the precariousness of Emma's position. She had to tread carefully, ensuring that her loyalty to Cnut remained unquestioned while safeguarding her children's future. The birth of Harthacnut strengthened Emma's position. As the son of both the reigning king and the queen, Harthacnut was a symbol of unity between the English and Danish factions. Emma threw her energy into ensuring his education and grooming him for leadership. She surrounded him with advisors and tutors who shared her vision of a strong, unified kingdom, yet Emma knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Harthacnut's claim to the throne was far from secure, and the rivalries within the court only deepened as Cnut's health began to decline. In 1035, Cnut's death marked a turning point in Emma's life. The stability she had worked so hard to maintain was shattered as factions within the court vied for control. Harold Harefoot, supported by his mother and a coalition of Danish nobles, quickly moved to seize the throne. Emma, refusing to accept this, retreated to Winchester, where she declared her loyalty to Harthacnut and established her own base of power. She was joined by a small but loyal group of supporters, including English clergy and nobles who favored her vision of a united kingdom. Emma's time in Winchester was marked by defiance and strategy. She wrote letters to Normandy, urging Edward and Alfred to return and support their half-brother's claim. She also reached out to allies across the kingdom, rallying support for Harthacnut while carefully avoiding open conflict with Harold. Emma's strength during this period earned her both admiration and enmity. To some, she was the embodiment of resilience and duty. To others, she was a schemer whose ambition threatened the kingdom's stability. The struggle for the throne came to a head in 1036 when Alfred, responding to his mother's call, returned to England. His arrival, however, ended in tragedy. Betrayed by allies who had secretly sided with Harold, Alfred was captured and brutally blinded, dying shortly afterward. Emma was devastated by the loss of her son, but her grief only steeled her resolve. She swore to honor Alfred's memory by ensuring that his brother Edward and Harthacnut would one day reclaim their rightful places. By 1037, Harold Harefoot had declared himself king, forcing Emma into exile. She fled to Flanders, where she sought refuge with Count Baldwin V. This period of exile was one of reflection and planning. Emma knew that her survival depended on alliances, and she worked tirelessly to build support for her cause. She used her wealth and influence to gather an army, promising her allies that Harthacnut's return would bring stability to England. The turning point came in 1040 when Harthacnut, backed by Emma's allies and his forces in Denmark, launched an invasion of England. Harold Harefoot's sudden death paved the way for Harthacnut's ascension, and Emma returned to England triumphant. Yet her victory was bittersweet. The kingdom she returned to was fractured, and the scars of years of conflict were evident. Emma threw herself into the task of rebuilding, serving as Harthacnut's most trusted advisor and working to heal the divisions that had plagued the realm. As the third act of Emma's life drew to a close, she stood as a figure of remarkable strength and resilience. She had weathered the storms of political intrigue, familial tragedy, and exile, emerging as one of the most powerful women of her time. Yet Emma knew that her work was far from over. The legacy she had fought so hard to protect was still fragile, and the challenges of the future loomed large. The final chapter of Emma's story begins with her return to England in 1040. Harthacnut's successful ascension to the throne marked a triumph for Emma, but it was not the peaceful resolution she had hoped for. The kingdom was fractured by years of war and shifting loyalties, and the scars of her son Alfred's tragic death weighed heavily on her. As queen mother and trusted advisor to Harthacnut, Emma worked tirelessly to restore stability, but her later years would test her resilience and determination once more. Harthacnut, though king, was a ruler beset by challenges. His harsh taxation to fund the Danish fleet earned him widespread resentment. Emma, seeing the discontent brewing, urged her son to adopt a more conciliatory approach, one that could unite the English and Danish factions rather than exacerbate their divides. Harthacnut, however, was more his father's son in temperament, pragmatic but ruthless. While Emma admired his strength, she worried that his methods might undo the fragile peace they had worked so hard to achieve. Emma's influence remained formidable. She used her position to continue patronizing the church, funding the restoration of monasteries, and supporting scholars and clergy who could help solidify the crown's legitimacy. Her court in Winchester became a center of culture and learning, echoing the ambitions she had once nurtured during her time with Cnut. Yet, for all her accomplishments, Emma was not without enemies. The nobility, always wary of centralized power, resented her influence over Harthacnut and whispered against her in private. The most surprising twist in Emma's later years came with the return of her son Edward from Normandy. Edward, who had spent most of his life in exile, arrived in England under Harthacnut's invitation to share power and strengthen the royal line. For Emma, this was both a joyous reunion and a painful reminder of the sacrifices she had made. Edward, shaped by years of distance and isolation, was no longer the boy she had sent away. His relationship with his mother was cordial but strained, colored by mistrust and differing visions for England's future. In 1042, Harthacnut died suddenly, likely of a stroke, during a wedding feast. His death left Edward as the sole heir to the throne, fulfilling Emma's long-held dream of seeing her son crowned king. Yet Edward's ascension marked the beginning of Emma's decline in influence. The new king, eager to assert his independence, began to distance himself from his mother. Edward, shaped by the Norman court and his own experiences, harbored resentment over what he saw as Emma's prioritization of her second family, with Cnut over her earlier children. Emma's diminished role became evident when Edward confiscated her vast estates in Winchester, stripping her of much of her wealth and power, though the act was framed as a practical decision to consolidate the crown's finances. It was also a symbolic gesture, a statement that Edward intended to rule without his mother's influence. For Emma, the loss was a bitter blow, not only to her position but to her legacy. She had sacrificed everything for her children, yet she now found herself sidelined in the court she had helped shape. Despite this estrangement, Emma continued to play a quiet but dignified role in the kingdom. She withdrew from the public eye, dedicating her later years to religious devotion and the preservation of her legacy. Her greatest achievement during this time was the commissioning of the Encomium Emmi Regini, a Latin text that celebrated her life and the reigns of her husbands and sons. The work, crafted under her guidance, presented Emma as a queen of strength, wisdom, and enduring loyalty, a powerful counter-narrative to the accusations and rivalries she had faced. Emma's later years were marked by reflection and a quiet resolve. Though she had been cast aside by Edward, she took solace in the knowledge that her lineage endured. She lived long enough to see Edward secure his position as king, earning the moniker Edward the Confessor for his piety and dedication to the church. While their relationship remained distant, Emma's influence on Edward's reign was undeniable. His Norman connections, his emphasis on religious reform, and his vision of a unified England all bore traces of his mother's guidance. Emma passed away in 1052, likely in Winchester, the city that had been at the heart of her life as queen. She was buried in the Old Minster, alongside her second husband, Cnut. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legacy endured. Emma of Normandy was a queen who defied the expectations of her time, navigating a world of shifting alliances, invasions, and betrayals with intelligence, grace, and determination. In the centuries that followed, Emma's story would be overshadowed by the great men of her era, Æthelred, not Edward, but her contributions to the shaping of medieval England are undeniable. She was a queen who bridged cultures, a mother who sacrificed for her children, and a woman who carved a place for herself in a world that sought to define her by the men around her. Emma's life serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She endured exile, loss, and betrayal, yet she never faltered in her pursuit of a stronger, more unified England. Her legacy lives on, not only in the kings and queens who followed her, but in the enduring narrative of a woman who refused to be forgotten.